thank everybody for joining in. This is a particularly special one, and I think particularly relevant to Lake Macquarie. Each and every one of you are giving up time to be here tonight, and I want to thank you for that. But I know that this hour that you're giving is absolutely nothing compared to the time you give to environmental issues around the lake. And of course, what we are doing tonight is we're going to be talking with the Minister for Energy and Environment, the Honourable Matt Kean, who I will introduce very soon. But first of all, can I just acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land that we are caring for, as it forms the largest part of my electorate, and that is the Awabakal people. I want to acknowledge that we have many of the Aboriginal people living in our local community. As a matter of fact, one of the largest Aboriginal communities outside of the Sydney metropolitan area. So they're very important, and so is their legacy and their stewardship still today. So I want to thank all of those Aboriginal people who live amongst us today. Can I also just do a little bit of housekeeping to everybody? We are asking people to keep their microphones on mute, and Madeline is one of my staff and is working in the background managing that. But we do need to keep the mics on mute if possible. And we are recording this. We're going to be recording it, so I hope nobody has any problems with that. I have with me tonight too some of my staff, Madeline, Jason. Madeline, who's sort of managing this. Jason, who's my, I guess, my main person involved with policy development and with the issues that we're dealing with here today. But I also have Belinda, who many of you might already know, who is one of my elected officers. We will be doing a number of questions soon, and they're curated questions. You can imagine there's a lot of questions that came in, but the reality is that a lot of them do cross over. So we've had to whittle it down a little bit, and anything that's not answered today, we will be following up for you with the Minister or a relevant Minister if it's not within Minister Kean's portfolio. So I will be if I can just introduce some of the topics, if I can, before I introduce the Minister. And so Lake Macquarie is a very difficult or interesting and electorate as far as environmental issues go. I've said, you know, looking at a lot of the other electorates around the area, if you look what happened, what Lake Macquarie deals with, you know, obviously the lake itself, which is so important, such a sensitive environment, beautiful environment that's been subject to a very successful remediation. We have to make sure that we don't let that slide away from us. But also to the north, if I can work north to south, the issues around the former Pasminco lead and zinc smelter, legacy issues there in the local community. Much of it's been dealt with, but we've still got legacy issues up there. As we move down and around, we've also got legacy of coal mining in the local area. So coal mining has been a huge industry. It's left a lot of problems for us, and there's ongoing problems with coal being one in the local area. One of those, of course, is the fact that it's used for thermal power production, and that leads us to, I'm going to go straight to Eraring Power Station, the largest thermal power station in Australia, let alone New South Wales. So I just spent 3 hours out there today actually looking around the plant and looking at the ash dam. And coal ash is the biggest source of waste in Australia. And we've got the biggest coal ash dam, as far as I know, in Australia. And we've got them at Vales Point and legacy from Munmore as well. So they're really big issues. But we've got a whole range of other issues that I'm sure people want to hear about from the Minister, talk about the bigger issues, about transition from coal to renewable energy. We want to talk about plastics, and I've got Faber Palasanami here from the university. Matt, you have quoted Dr. Palasanami in the past about his credit card, the ingestion issue of plastics. So we've got plastic pollution, biodiversity. I mean, there's a whole host of things impacting on biodiversity. The bushfires this year. And look, let's not deny that there's competing interests and views about this. We just debated the Local Land Services Act in Parliament last week. And so there's a lot of issues there of concern about how we deal with biodiversity, particularly iconic creatures such as koalas. But there's things that I think people would have some general interest in, if not specifically. And Matt, can I just introduce you to everybody? Matt Kean came in 2011. I've known him certainly well since 2011 when he came in with the Barry O'Farrell landslide. But he's got two of the most interesting portfolios, I guess, particularly for our purposes: energy and environment. I mean, that's huge. Could be a conflict in some ways, but also it's a good coming together for other purposes, particularly if you believe in things like climate change, global warming, the need to transition away from thermal power production into renewables. And guess what? This minister does. So that's a great starting point. But I don't want to talk too much about that. Matt, I'm really pleased. I've been trying to get you up here. I'm hoping I can get you back up here soon to meet some of the people in the local area. I'm going to just hand over to you to talk to some of these issues, and then we'll come back. We'll answer some of the questions that have come in, if that's all right.
Well, Greg, firstly, thank you so much for the opportunity to address this town hall meeting, and can I thank everyone for taking the time to tune in this evening. Look, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered, whether that's the Guringai people down here in the electorate of Hornsby or the Awakabal. I apologise. And pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. And ladies and gentlemen, could I just acknowledge your outstanding local MP, Greg Piper? If he is not one of the most decent, honest, and hardworking members of the Parliament, then I don't know who is. I mean, I was elected as a young MP in 2011, and Greg was one of the first people to reach out to me, to mentor me, and to encourage me. So I just want to say, Greg, a huge thank you from me personally for everything you've done, everything you do for good government in New South Wales, and for being a tireless and fearless advocate for your beautiful community up in Lake Macquarie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Look, Lake Macquarie is an amazing and precious place. It's a community that's resilient and strong. It's a community with a really strong ethic for environmental protection. Greg's asked me to talk to you about a number of issues today, and I promise that I'll get to them all in turn. I'd like to begin talking about the number one issue that Greg started, and that was climate change. And I'd firstly like to say, Greg, I'll pull you up on one thing. Climate change is not a matter of belief. It's a matter of science. And my view as the Minister for Energy and Environment is that there can be plenty of debate about how we lower our emissions. I like to think that we should do it in a way that also sees us being able to grow our economy. But there should be no debate that we need to lower our emissions, and we need to take serious and decisive and responsible action to do our bit to leave our kids a better planet than we found. So I want to acknowledge the sacrifices that have been made by households and businesses in Lake Macquarie to keep our community safe during the coronavirus pandemic. Now is the time to rebuild and demonstrate that tackling climate change and a healthy economy go hand in hand. The national electricity system is rapidly decarbonising. Baseload thermal generators like Eraring are scheduled to retire. In fact, in the next 15 years, 4 of our 5 existing coal-fired power generators will come to the end of their lives. And we know from what we've seen in Victoria in particular, following the closure of Hazelwood, that existing capacity needs to be replaced before it closes in order to avoid price spikes and blackout. Now, the uptake of renewable energy is increasing, and this generation is in areas with little transmission infrastructure. So these issues are impacting on security, reliability, and congestion in the network. So to overcome these challenges, the government has developed the New South Wales electricity strategy to make sure that we create a competitive, low-cost market that delivers resilient energy supply whilst putting downward pressure on electricity prices. And we want to take advantage of cheap renewable energy for businesses and households, whilst ensuring the reliability and stability of the network to replace generation from traditional power stations as they retire over the coming decade. So let me be very clear for everyone on this call. Reliability is a non-negotiable, but there are different types of generation that will deliver that reliability that go hand in hand with that intermittent energy that renewables provides. So as we face the challenge of rebuilding from the coronavirus pandemic, we're bringing forward our plans to build the clean energy infrastructure that will generate the jobs that we need now and the clean energy that we're going to need into the future. And Greg, let me just stop for a second and say this. The rest of the world is decarbonising. 50% of the world's GDP has already signed up to hit net zero emissions. You would have seen today that the new Japanese Prime Minister has committed Japan to hit net zero emissions by 2050. China has said that they'll hit net zero emissions by 2060, which is a huge step forward. And if Joe Biden wins the White House, he's going to spend $2 trillion decarbonising the entire American economy over the next 4 years. So we face a critical choice. Do we get ahead of the curve and grab the opportunities that a low carbon world will present this country? Or do we stick our head in the sand, get left behind, and become a rust bucket state? I think the choice is a very clear one. So our net zero plan is not just about protecting our environment, it's about protecting and growing our economy. We've got a plan that's fully funded with a $2 billion investment and a roadmap to cut emissions by 35% by 2030 on the way to net zero emissions by 2050. So together with the New South Wales electricity strategy, we'll create around 2,400 new jobs and an additional 1,700 jobs in regional New South Wales. That's just in relation to our electricity strategy. I'll talk a bit about that during the Q&A, Greg, but I wanted to also touch on the issue of coal ash, particularly at Eraring. Now, I know that the community welcomes our transition to clean and green energy, but I also know that while Eraring is still operating, people are concerned about coal ash. I've met with the Community Coal Ash Alliance and I understand their concerns. The Environmental Protection Authority is closely monitoring the Eraring ash dam. It has placed stringent conditions on Eraring's environmental protection licence that require them to manage dust and water pollution from ash disposal. Origin is aiming to get the recycling of ash at Eraring up to 80% from its current level of 35%. And they've put in place increased sales agreements with national and regional vendors with the aim of increasing the quantity of fly ash that is sent to reuse. So the EPA has approved the use of coal ash in soils and compost and in concrete as a fill material. And we hope that the building and construction industry can make more use of coal ash derived products. And we'll be looking at how we do that as part of our 20-year waste strategy, which I'll be announcing early next year. The Legislative Council has established an inquiry into the costs of remediation of sites that have coal ash dams, and I'll look closely at that report once it's completed. Again, we'll do that in conjunction with the 20-year waste strategy that will be announced early next year. On the topic of air pollution and air quality monitoring, Greg, you've been a fearless advocate on this issue on behalf of your community. My department has advised me that Eraring and Vales Point are the main sources of air emissions in Lake Macquarie and in Wyong. Other sources include coal mining, residential wood heating, quarrying, motor vehicles, and recreational boats. Now, the last study done on air quality in the Lake Macquarie and Wyong region between 2013 and 2016 found that air quality was generally good or pretty good. Having said that, I've listened to the community's concerns about air quality in the region since that study, and I've asked the department to establish a government-operated air quality monitoring station at Lake Macquarie. That's happened directly as a result of Greg's advocacy. So working with the council, we've found a site at Fishery Point Road, Morisset, that's been agreed by the department and Lake Macquarie City Council, with final public works approval due by the end of October 2020. Construction will take around 14 weeks, and we hope it'll be completed by the end of the year. So Greg, I'll definitely be coming up to Lake Macquarie to visit before the end of the year so that we can announce this initiative that is as a result of your advocacy. On the topic of bushfires, I know that people in this community are focused on the upcoming bushfire season. And I want to give a bit of an overview of where national parks and wildlife are up to. We've just employed an additional 125 firefighters to focus on hazard reduction burns, particularly in strategic asset zones. So that's the zones between national parks and also residential property. National Parks is the largest firefighting agency in New South Wales. In fact, they have more qualified firefighters than any other government agency. It was very unfair, a lot of the flack that National Parks copped in the last bushfire season, because they were out there on the front lines protecting people and property and trying to keep us safe. This fire season, yes, we've employed additional firefighters. We've also increased the target of strategic burns that we'll be doing between national parks and people's property. We're partnered with the RFS and Fire and Rescue New South Wales and Lake Macquarie Council to deliver 2 high priority hazard reduction burns, one at Seahampton, that'll be a 22 hectare burn, and one at the Awaba Bay, which will be a 12 hectare burn. The Seahampton burn will reduce the risk of high intensity wildfire to the village, while the Awaba Bay burn, completed on the 2nd of October, will help protect an adjoining aged care facility and other private properties in Bolton Point. A Hunter and Central Coast region climate change vulnerability assessment was completed this year, and that generated a range of ideas that will help key regional systems to become more climate resilient. The assessment report will be available on the Adapt New South Wales website in the near future. So Greg, just for the benefit of your constituents, we are working very closely with the RFS and with the council to identify areas of risk, and National Parks is in there doing hazard reduction burns. And if there are additional sites of concern to you and your residents, then if you could please let me know so I can feed that into our planning processes. Greg, I know that one issue that you've spoken to me about a number of times is plastic pollution. And if I get that bag of whippersnipper plastic again, I will be very embarrassed that we haven't actually done anything. So let me just say that I know that your community is the sharp end of the global plastic pollution crisis. You literally see it washing up in your shores of the lake. So if we want to leave a better legacy than litter to our kids to clean up, we have to act now. That's why the government is developing a comprehensive New South Wales plastics plan. In March, we released the public consultation, a discussion paper called Cleaning Up Our Act, Redirecting the Future of Plastic in New South Wales. And it's much more than just banning a product, and we'll be phasing out the use of certain types of plastics, but it's more than just about banning products, which will have a role to play. It's about changing how we use, reuse, and dispose of plastic as well. It's also about creating those circular economies so that we can reuse plastic and find beneficial uses for them in things like road base, for example. So the discussion paper looks at phasing out key single-use and problematic plastics, tripling the proportion of plastic recycled in New South Wales by 2030, reducing plastic litter items by 25% by 2025, and making New South Wales a leader in national and international research on plastics. So we got more than 16,000 submissions, Greg, and they're all now being reviewed before we move to finalise the plan. Finally, a relatively uncontentious issue, and that's koalas. I know many of you are passionate about ensuring a healthy koala population in your region and indeed right across the country. So I've set the goal of doubling koala numbers by 2050. The government has invested around $50 million in the New South Wales koala strategy, but this is just the beginning. I've recently commissioned some of the best scientists in New South Wales to provide me with advice and a roadmap as to how we will meet that objective. We've got a long way to go, but I see using our existing public lands, so our national parks, as a key plank in our platform to deliver that doubling of koala populations. I want to see my kids and their kids and their kids be able to see a koala in the wild, and it's going to have to start drastic action now if we're going to see net zero not just be about our emissions by 2050, but about our koalas. We're going to need to take drastic action right now if we're going to stop that happening. So we've got 4 pillars to secure koalas in the wild. Firstly, koala habitat conservation. Conservation through community action, safety and health of koala populations, and building on our knowledge to improve koala conservation. It's going to require additional protections for koala habitat. It's going to require more money and research to make sure we get this right, because there's too much at stake. We recently created a new national park, Ulanura. That means koala country. I hope that we'll be able to call all of New South Wales koala country if we get the policy settings right. Greg, that's a bit of an overview as you asked me to provide, but the main reason people are here today is to ask questions that I can answer directly and candidly. So very happy to open up to questions. Again, thank you everyone for tuning in. And Greg, thank you for the opportunity you've given me to speak to your community directly.
Yeah, okay, Matt. Well, thank you for that. And so we've had to curate some of the questions because there were so many. Some of them do cross over. Can I say, I wish I could introduce everybody that was here, but I can't do that. I don't want to just pick on any particular group there because there's so many people out there working in the local for the environment. So I do once again just want to thank everybody for being here. I'm glad you touched on the plastics. It's an interesting debate we had earlier in the year, by the way. And plastics, you know, there's a couple of different ways in which people are coming from it, but we've got our sustainable neighbourhood groups as well, and plastics police. We've got researchers at Newcastle University with favour, but that was a push by it was a non-government bill, it was an opposition bill for a ban phasing out of single-use plastics, and I think that you actually support that, but you supporting it as part of an overall package, so it's that we deal with it. So I don't want to go too far down that path, but as long as we're still pursuing that, and that's what you're saying, I'm very pleased about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that thanks to the research of the team up at the University of Newcastle, and I know there's an outstanding professor who may even be on the call today, but
he is.
By 2050, there'll be more plastic in the ocean than fish. That's an appalling statistic. People are ingesting about a credit card of plastic every week. I mean, that is, you know, that is hugely problematic for public health right across New South Wales. You know, no one should expect to go to the beach and be swimming around in plastic. We've got to do better. And phasing out single-use plastics, I think, and problematic plastics is going to be a big part in that. So I'm absolutely committed to that. I want to tackle it as part of a strategic framework. It'll not just be about phasing out key single-use and problematic plastics. It's about tripling the proportion of plastic recycled in New South Wales by 2030. It's about reducing plastic litter items by 25% by 2025. It's about making New South Wales a leader in national and international research on plastics. As I said, we've created a discussion paper. We've gone out to the community. We had over 16,000 submissions that are currently being reviewed. We're working our way through that. The plan is not just about banning one product. It's about changing how our economy uses, reuses, and disposes of plastic. And, you know, we need to get this right. I mean, one of the best things about this country is our beautiful natural environment. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to do everything possible to make sure that we leave it to our kids and their kids better than we found it.
Okay, well, thanks, Matt.